peeps, this is Tish from Cotton Candy Quilts in lovely scenic Gaston, Indiana. And today we're doing Harmony Block 7. Only we're going to take it in little tiny increments. This is an untraditional Lone Star, which means it's a little trickier to do because it has a little bit different methods to it. And Lone Stars tend to be tricky anyway. Up to this point, we have been doing our blocks just a little bit bigger and cutting down to make them the right size, but now we have to have things perfect, which is a little tough to do. So I encourage you to go back over to the Cotton Candy YouTube page and look up Beginners Cafe and look for check your quarter, and we're going to get a perfect 1/4 inch before we start, otherwise our block won't go together nice and straight. So this one is just the center diamond. There will be 4 sets of diamonds, and we're going to do each one in a different segment. I think it's really pretty, don't you? So if you're ready, I'm ready. Come on, let's get started on this. This is fun. So I wanted to give you a bit of a cautionary tale about the main floral fabric, because you're going to be cutting differently than you usually do. So I wanted to give you a little demonstration. The first thing is you are cutting the lengthwise, down the lengthwise piece of the fabric instead of a cross grain. So the first thing that you want to do is press your fabric with starch. She does recommend using starch on your Lone Star, and I absolutely agree with that. It's going to make it so much easier not to stretch your bias edges. But first we have to get off the portion that we're going to use for our borders. So I have pressed my fabric, which means that I've taken out that center crease that comes from the factory and put it so that it's straight. And if you notice, the edges aren't straight. Well, the edges aren't straight because they're never wound correctly. Well, not correctly, they're never wound straight. There is no way possible to wind fabric completely straight on a bolt. If you've ever watched it done, you'd understand why. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off the selvage on both halves. So we might as well just get rid of it now while we're doing. So to do that, once I have my fabric straight, I'm going to lay my ruler at 1 inch, and I'm going to start cutting down the length. So I'm going to continue on with this. You don't want any selvage. You don't want any selvage in your piece because it's going to, first of all, if you're not paying attention, you'll have that white part. Don't want that white part. And the other reason is because selvage, if you notice, you can tell on the back that this is much denser than the fabric next to it. That is because they hook, you can see little dots there where they hook the edge of the fabric onto the machine. Well, if you get this part in your piece, no matter where it is, whether that's in the backing or it's in a seam in the front or it's down the length of your border, then this is going to shrink differently and it will pucker your whole piece. So let's go ahead and cut that off, and then I'll be right back here to show you the next step. Okay, a little trick here because this is a little different than how she does it in the instructions, but I think you're going to find it easier. She has you cut off enough for all 4 borders in one chunk. Well, it's kind of hard to do. You're using your mat instead of your ruler, and your mat is just not as accurate, and it's harder to stay accurate because it's going to move, unlike how it does underneath your ruler. So I'm going to go ahead and cut each border width just as she recommends, the size she recommends, down the length right now instead of waiting until step 9. So I'm going to just go ahead and cut these borders down the length, and I'll start out and show you how to do it. I am using a square ruler now, Because why? Because a regular long ruler isn't usually wide enough to do these borders. So I'm just going to line up at the correct number. And I've made a straight edge when I started, right? Because I used the inch mark to cut off the selvage. And then I'm just going to start cutting and moving the fabric down just as I did before. I filmed these in my home actually instead of in my studio because my studio is loud and has a lot of echoing in the building. So I am using the same kind of mat you have. This is a regular large Olfa mat, and I can still do it because the width of the fabric, the weight of the fabric is over on my right hand side. It helps if you keep the ruler right side up. And that means that the fabric is out of the way and I'm not going to tromp over it accidentally with my rotary cutter. So let me get all of these cut, and then I will cut the rest of the pieces out of this, and then we're going to get sewing. So I've cut all of my border pieces, but I've just cut the length of the fabric. I have not cut them down to size, and you don't want to do that yet because you don't really know exactly what size your quilt is going to be when you're finished, because we all have a little bit of fudge here and there. So just cut the length and then just stop. So we'll measure when we get ready to cut the length of the borders. Okay, so this is our first strip set that I have finished here. And you'll notice that it's kind of offset down here. That's because we're going to cut at an angle and you waste less of your fabric that way. And I'm also going to show you that my seam is pressed open. This is really important when you're doing a New York Beauty or a Lone Star, a Texas Lone Star. Wrong state. So it's going to lay smoother, and you're going to be able to match those points better if you have that pressed open. Once you get this made, measure to make sure that it's the size that it's supposed to be from here to here. And when I do the pressing open, I don't use any special tools. She does recommend a special tool in there, but I just move my finger along in front of the iron and hold it open while I press. And then I turn it over to the right side to make sure this is all nice and flat. And I give it yet another spray of Best Press because I want it as stiff as I can get it. So now we're going to start cutting our pieces. And the trick with this is that you may have to straighten up more than once, because the bias edge moves a little sometimes when you cut. So I double check to make sure that it's correct. So the first thing I'm going to do is make the correct angle. So I have the 45-degree line right across the bottom here. Right across the bottom. Isn't that nice? So I have this laying out as flat as I can, and since I've now starched it a couple of times, it's laying pretty flat actually. And then I have the bottom of the ruler laying across right at 45 degrees. And make sure up here where the two pieces of fabric that you're inside that by about 1/4 of an inch so that you don't get any of the edge. Oops. Then I'm going to do that again because I actually moved the ruler. And then this piece is throwaway. And then we have to cut the rest of the diamonds. So now I'm measuring from this edge, and I want to go to the correct measurement. And if you notice, here's the correct measurement here. The bottom line, that 45 degrees right here, let me scoot this over a little bit. Line it up again. That 45 degree measurement is right along the bottom again. So you want to make sure that's true every single time that you measure. And if it's not true, if you can't line up this way and this way, then you're not going to have nice even pieces. So now that I've got it lined up, I'm going to cut. Notice I move my other fabric away before I lift up on the ruler. And there is the first part of the first diamond. So let me get the rest of these cut, and then we'll go on to the next piece that goes with this. This is a non-traditional Lone Star. So the techniques are just a little bit different on this one than they are on some of the others. But you will find that it goes together pretty well because these pieces are pretty big. So we need 8 star points. So I'm going to start cutting, and then we'll come back with the other piece. Okay, well, I've got all of the first step cut. So this was the first strip set. And as you can see, it's being bordered by the aqua flying. And I'm ready to do the second set, and I thought I'd cut for you one more time just so that you can make sure you know what you're doing here. So again, I'm lining up the 45 degree line on the bottom of the strip set and making sure that I'm inside from the selvage. See where I am right here? I would actually get a little bit of the selvage. So let's come in just a little bit. And then I am making a cut at 45 degrees, and this is my throwaway. I'll move this down a little bit for you. And then your next cut, you're actually lining up here, from here to here, with the correct size. So the size listed on your pattern booklet. And then I am lining up that 45 degree again as well. So it's lined up this way and this way. See how that goes? And then I am making a cut. You want to hold your ruler nice and steady. And make that next cut. And you may need to straighten this edge up every cut or two. Sometimes it's every cut. It just depends on how my mood is that day, I think. But if this does not line up, so here's my first cut. And if I take my second cut, let me pull it down for you again. And it does not line up with the 45 degree when I put it on the correct measurement on this side. You can tell I'm being super duper careful here. And in this case, the 45 does. But if I lined up here and it kind of came down or went up, then I'd turn the whole strip set over, line the 45 up against the bottom, and trim up that edge. So maybe my edge would trim like that because it wouldn't be exactly square. Flip it back over and cut again. So we need 8 of these. So let me get these cut, and then we'll go to the next step. I am on cut 5, and I want you to see that I'm lined up on the left hand side, but if I come right here, do you see that little gap right down here? That means that I'm not lined up correctly anymore. And the angle has scooted, the little bias has scooted every time that I have cut, just by a little hair. So Get this set so that it works again. What we're going to do is take the strip and turn it the other direction. You can notice that my seam is again open. And then I'm going to turn my ruler over because this doesn't have a 45 going in each direction. It's just one direction. I'm going to line that 45 up against the bottom again. And I think you can see that I am going to be taking off more at the bottom than the top. So right up here it is pretty much even, but right down here there's a little hair that's out of line. And that is going to even my cut up again. See, it's just not very much, and up here it's nothing. But it's enough to make it out of alignment again. So then I'm going to turn it back over and continue to cut. Okay, I have my pieces cut here, as you can see, and you want to arrange them as they're shown in the booklet so that you get things going the right way, because it would be really easy to get things going the wrong way. And this goes against here like this to make your first point. So you want to turn them over, and they aren't going to line up exactly because this seam needs to match at 1/4 inch. So I go down until I know it's at 1/4. And that's where I start pinning. And when you do that, when you open it up, those seams are going to match. I have my thumb a little far, but you can tell there that my seams are going to match. So it's not like you're lining up end to end like this, because if you do, that seam is not going to be right. See how far down it is? And what would happen is when you take your seam up here, then when you folded it out, let me fold it 1/4 here, it would look like that, and it would make a little jiggy-jaggy. So you're lining up with the seam itself, and you want it to cross at 1/4 inch. So you would keep experimenting until you get that in the right place, so that that seam crosses exactly at 1/4, and then you pin and sew down that side. So let me get these sewn and I'll be right back. I have my first one sewn, and I wanted to show you a little bit about it. Do you notice that this goes past about 1/4 inch? It does the same thing at this end. Goes past a little 1/4 inch. That's so this seam lines up, because that's the important part. And then when you open it, look at that. Isn't that perfect? That's what you want. This is the seam that you're working on. And when you do that, the other sides line up correctly so that they're not hanging out at some strange angle. Again, you're going to press these open instead of to one side. And I want to tell you that when you press this, I want you to be real careful, because that is straight bias and you will pull it so easily. So make sure and be really gentle with your iron, really gentle. Don't press and shove, okay?